what really came about was this strong desire to use education as a tool to give my students tools to meet their dreams, to surpass their understanding and limits of what they think they can do, and really grasp at things that are beyond their imagination, beyond the
Mm.
things that maybe their family has been able to do so far.
Welcome to another episode of the Race Relations Podcast. I'm your host, Kaleb Sinclair, and today I am so excited. I have my cousin in the house, and we are going to be talking about education. And she has been a teacher for a long time. I'm going to get into her bio, but first I want to just kind of open up the conversation of education with a little something that I've written. So this conversation of education is something that's been going on in our American society for a long time. And when it comes to education, grades and behavior are often the only two aspects institutions and individuals review when ascribing a child a sense of value in the education system. However, the historical and the cultural problem with this value system is that environment plays an important role in creating the conditions for a successful and a happy student to be able to be set up to achieve not only good grades, but the other critical growth that occurs inside of school. In truth, the current educational system overlooks the relevance of a nurturing space that is inclusive for all cultural backgrounds. And as such, many children that lie outside of the dominant culture suffer the consequences, and even some of the dominant culture within the dominant culture with a lower socioeconomic background suffer as well. And in order for us to be able to progress in the public, we need to first understand how to push for change and the aid that is necessary to be able to bring resources and knowledge to those that need it to create the change, right? And specifically on this episode, we're going to be talking about teachers. Again, my cousin is a teacher. And as teachers, they are in a position more than anyone to be able to create change classroom by classroom through comprehending how they are implicated in this nurturing of environment for their students. It is a teacher's responsibility to nourish the soil of the proverbial seeds so they can grow. But what's the exact recipe? Well, obviously, it's going to differ from classroom to classroom. But in this episode, I want to delve into my cousin's experience as a teacher. And I want to delve into the required ingredients by speaking with, again, a teacher who is building her own recipe for success at her school, which mainly serves the Latin and the community, the Latin and Latinx community. All right. So for her bio, again, my cousin's name is, you now go by Isabel Lynons. So it's different. It's not Sinclair like it was before. Let me not get ahead of myself. So Isabel Lynons is a master's level teacher. The focus of her career has been in the education field for the past 7 years. She's received her bachelor's in early childhood and family studies, a minor in Spanish, and a master's in teaching, all at the University of Washington. During her time studying, she's focused on trauma-informed practices, resilience, longitudinal studies of early childhood trauma, and working in communities with historically marginalized people groups. She began her teaching journey working in early childhood and seeing how integral and formative the early years of child's life are, and then moved to teaching in a dual language school at an elementary level where she's able to serve a linguistically and culturally diverse student body and community. So without further ado, Isabel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here. I just feel like ever since you've started this podcast, I just have really been reflecting on how important these conversations are and how I've had so many of these conversations with my loved ones and trusted people in my life, and they are kind of like the foundation of my growth. They're like the
Right.
reason why I've been able to grow is because I have people that I can have these conversations with. So for me, it's just exciting to be here to push this work forward. And I just think it's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really feel you on that part of just having those conversations. And, I just want to remind our listeners and our viewers, empathy is at the the crux of our relationships as human beings. It's at the core of who we are. And if we can't step into the different experiences of others, then we are at a disadvantage when it comes to being able to create change and transformation in the world. And the whole point of this podcast is to be able to bring light to other people's experiences that we wouldn't normally have access to. So I'm so glad to have you here. Again, your experience is not one that a lot of people get a chance to take a look at as a teacher, again, in a multilingual school. And let's get into it. First and foremost, before I start asking you all the questions, I wanted to just kind of set the stage with a couple of facts, and then we can kind of move into the questions from there. So a couple of facts that I pulled that regarding the Hispanic community is the number of Hispanic students enrolled in college rose from 3.17 million in 2016 to 3.2 million in 2017. 2016 to 2017, making them the only one of two demographic groups that saw an increase in college attendance, right, according to the National Center of Education Statistics. Now, nearly half of the Latino students in their first are the first people in their families to go to college. About 70% of Latino undergraduates in higher education come from families in the bottom half of earners, according to the federal data analyzed by the College Lobbying Group of American Council on Education. Now, where it really gets interesting is where you look at the different percentages and statistics on the professors that are teaching in the classrooms, right? And now 73.2% of professors are white. Hispanic professors are 4.7%, right? And this is out of the step of the percentage of undergraduate students that are 52% white and then 19.8% Hispanic. So what we can see from that statistic brought to us by American Council of Education and the U.S. Department of Education is that there is a huge divide between Latino students when it comes to being in schools and having access to schools, and also the teachers that are there that share their lived experiences to be able to bring them into the classroom and create a safe space, right? And this goes back to that recipe of creating an environment where students can thrive. And so the first question that I have for you, Isabel, is, for you, what influenced you to become a teacher, particularly one that was teaching on a bilingual professional basis? Because as kids, that wasn't something that was really, we were involved in a lot, right? So tell me your story. Why was that important to you to become a bilingual teacher?
It's funny because I didn't actually start teaching because I wanted to be a bilingual teacher. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
even think when I started in the teaching field, I didn't even think bringing my bilingualism to the table was an option at all. I actually started in the teaching field because I grew up, my mother is Nicaraguan, and we grew up visiting our family in Nicaragua a lot. And I had the opportunity to go to school a few times with my cousin. And so, as a child, going back and forth between the United States as a first world country and then Nicaragua, which is the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, I saw just stark differences in the
Mm-hmm.
education system. And so, as a really young child, I started to really ponder these things and think about what education was doing for me. And what really came about was this strong desire to use education as a tool to give my students tools to meet their dreams, to surpass their understanding and limits of what they think they can do, and really grasp at things that are beyond their imagination, beyond the
Mm-hmm.
things that maybe their family has been able to do so far. Because that's kind of what I felt like going back and forth between these two countries was like the tools I was getting in the United States, if only I could give those tools to these other students. And so that's kind of what got me started, was this desire to use education as a tool to bring everybody to the same level, to have the same opportunities, really, no matter what background they come from. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started at the University of Washington, and I got into my master's program of teaching. And I remember director of my program coming up to me and being like, Isabel, you speak Spanish, right? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, do you want to be in a dual language program? I'm like, a dual whose program? Like, what is this thing? I had
Right.
never heard about it before. Um, and so
Which
I
is
just
crazy.
started, it is, it really is. I mean, I went to a school um, where, yeah, like speaking Spanish meant you went to the learning center. Right? It
Hmm.
meant that you needed extra help because you need to speak more English, right? And
Wow.
so that's kind of the education system I was in. And dual language is by no means a new program, but it's definitely trying to become more prevalent in all of the school
Hmm.
districts. So I started in this as an intern in a dual language classroom, Spanish, English, and it just blew my mind that there was a program out there that reflected me as a person.
Yeah.
And the reason I continued with it was because I just always think to this day, if I had had this program as a student, oh, how
Hmm.
I would have thrived to be affirmed in every part of me, not just the English speaking side, but to say, oh, your Spanish speaking side is also valuable and it has power, and both of those things are valuable, and you can bring both sides of you to the table. Um,
Yes.
is kind of why I kept doing it, because I want my students to see that too, that every part of themselves can be brought to the table and it's powerful and it's valuable and it can be leveraged for their future. They don't have to leave one side at home and only choose one part for their future.
Right. Right. I mean, that's so interesting, sad, but also amazing, the progression of that, your kind of narrative there, because it's the first time that I've ever been introduced when we sat down and talked that there was a program out there that was, providing and promoting a dual lingual teaching, master's degree. That's really in a world of its own. And to not know that as a young Hispanic kid growing up, that was available for you, that I would just imagine how, like you said, that could play such a pivotal role in the life that you had growing up, right? And that brings me to my second question. Tell me about the importance of that, having a dual linguistic teacher in your classroom that you're teaching and in the classrooms that you've taught before, because I think we often in American society forget the burden of responsibility that we place on students that are coming from a different culture, that don't speak English as their first language. And we expect them to not only be proficient in academics, but be proficient in language. And if we were to be in that same position, we would be overwhelmed with the amount of responsibility that is to carry both of those things. We're not really meeting our students where they are in their experience and helping them be able to really grow in a way that nurtures both their culture and, again, a different version, the current, kind of resident that they're in right now. So tell me about that. How important is that? Have you seen the impact in your classroom?
I just think I mean, it's everything. I think that historically we've seen students whose first language is not English underperforming in our education systems. And it's
Hmm.
not because of lack of intelligence on those students' parts. And I think that in our dual language program, when we are affirming the experience of our students whose first language is not English, we see them blossom and not only
Hmm.
perform at the same level as our students whose first language is English, but actually surpass them. When both languages are
Wow.
affirmed and, given that power and fed academically, that we actually see that once students reach middle school, our bilingual dual language students, they actually start to surpass their peers academically. And I think that has a lot, I mean, it has a lot to do with having, it starts with the teacher
Yeah.
being like, guess what? Your identity in both of these languages is valid and both of them are valuable. And I just think about even this week, I did a read aloud with my students that was about it was this book about this little girl who was coming into a new classroom and she didn't speak any English and trying to, go on a field trip with the other students. Super
Mm-hmm.
simple. But through this one book, because I have the experience of having spoken in two languages, and I have the experience of being in a room and having a hard time communicating with other people because I'm trying to learn this other language, I'm able to talk to my students. Oh, raise your hand if you have felt so scared to try a word because you're afraid you're going to feel stupid or be laughed at. And all the
Mm,
hands go up, right? Raise your hand though if you want to try so hard to communicate because you understand and you want to connect. All the hands go up, right? So just such a simple read aloud that's like part of my literacy curriculum. And because I
sure.
have this experience, I look at this read aloud and I say, oh, this is an opportunity to validate a lot of my students' experiences and say, it's okay. And then to go and make that connection and say, you know what, though? We have to be able to try those words. So when you hear someone being brave and trying a new word on and trying to say it, what can you do for them? You could not laugh for sure and say,
Mm-hmm.
keep going. You can do it. Those little seeds that are put throughout the entire year, that was like 10 minutes of my day, are so powerful. And
Yeah.
it's such a different experience than what students in what we call like monolingual classrooms may be getting. And it's an experience that even in monolingual classrooms, a student can get if a teacher is made aware that that's their experience, right? But since it's something
Mm-hmm.
that I've experienced myself, it's second nature to make
Right.
that connection, and
Right.
it can really make a world of a difference for another student. And for students whose first language is English, they're also getting something. They're getting that empathy piece. Oh man, sometimes I think it's silly when they say that word, but actually they want to try it on. And if I were to try to speak another language, that might be hard for me too. So it's really not just serving one group, it's really serving the whole class.
Right, right, right. I mean, you're touching on that empathy piece right now in such a way that's it's dynamic because it is not only like as you're saying for the students that are coming in and English is not their first language, but it's also impactful for the students that English is their first language. And you're bridging both your lived experience being a dual language speaker with that of again the mono language speaker who doesn't have that experience, right? And you're saying, hey, this is a possibility. These are the emotions that go along with trying something new for the first time and progressing at it. It's not failing, you're progressing at it. And we have to be confident, we have to be proud, we have to make space for this to occur. And you're encouraging those kids to do so. That is like so amazing. Tell me, like, what is that like? Do you see the kids become more confident over time? Do they really start to pick up on it?
Yeah, you start with kids who are in their shell, and then all of a sudden you start to pick at these experiences that they've felt their whole lives, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
see it all of a sudden like, oh my goodness, I do feel that way. And
Yeah.
I think what it ultimately is you see me,
Mm-hmm.
you understand. And I think what it starts to build, because it really is dependent on how you respond to
Yeah.
those students, right?
Yeah.
And when you respond in a way that makes them feel safe, like, oh, I can say that school is hard for me sometimes, and this teacher accepts that, this classroom accepts that. Those are the conversations that start to bring these students that have been quiet for a long time out of their shell and say, it's safe for me here. I get to share these things. I can try things on, and I don't have to do it perfectly. This is a safe environment for me to do that in. And so it is confidence building, but I think what it is first is creating a space where students even feel comfortable to
Yeah.
start sharing and building that confidence.
Right. Right. Again, I think it goes back to that place of it's okay to attempt something that's brand new, right? And we don't have to, as we often do in this society, drag you through the mud or, totally discredit you for attempting something new and not being good at it, right?
Which is
There,
a really strong narrative, I think, in
yeah.
our society. The do it right the first time, that there is a right way to do it. And
Hmm.
there's a very small percentage of students who understand the right way of doing things and can do it perfectly every single time. And I think that kind of mindset really cultivates a lot of issues and self-esteem and taking risks, because in order to be a learner, you have to be willing to take risks, right? So really, when you think about learning a new language, a lot of times what we talk about as teachers is um, learning a language is gives you lifelong skills. These
Yeah.
skills of trying on something new, taking risks, being brave. That's not just something you use in a language, but then you take and you use for the rest of your life too,
It's
really.
generalizable, right, into the
Hmm.
different skills and experiences you'll have in your life,
Exactly. Yes.
right? That is so good. That is so good. Tell me, I'm interested before we keep going on this kind of pattern of security and just confidence building. How many teachers in your school are bilingual, duolingual, and how? What's the impact of that? Is that like, is it every classroom that has a dual language teacher? What does that look like?
So we have two programs housed in my school. We have a monolingual program, which would just be like your mainstream
Hmm.
English speaking classroom, and that's two classrooms per grade level. And then we have our dual language program, which is two classes per grade level. But then we have office staff, support staff, and the majority of our office support staff and admin are bilingual on top of two classrooms per grade level, so 10, 12 uh, bilingual staff, probably plus 10 more, so maybe like around 20 to 25 bilingual staff.
Wow.
And I think that the impact is enormous because anyone can walk into our school. And I think that's such a simple statement to say, right? Anyone should be able to walk into the school, right? But the entrance of your school can be such a formidable threshold for
Mm,
families based on what their past experience has been in a school system. And to be greeted at the front desk where you need to communicate the needs of your child and try to get resources for your child, right? Right there, to have someone greet you in a language that you are comfortable in, that is your first language, that you don't have to have this anxiety of someone misunderstanding you, is massive.
yeah.
I think that some people take for granted that um, not every family comes into their office at their schools because they don't feel comfortable. They don't
Mm,
feel welcomed there, even if the door is unlocked all day long,
yeah.
right? And
But
that
is it unlocked?
language, exactly. And the language is I mean, it's not just language, but language is a huge piece of that. That when I
Yeah.
get there, there's going to be someone there that's going to understand my needs and help me get
Hmm.
what I need. So it's
Right.
huge.
Right. I mean, it is. It absolutely is. I know for myself as a psychologist working, for my agency right now that serves multiple different demographics when it comes to race, I feel, and I can say this because I wrestle with it, but I also approach it. I know for myself, I was taught Spanish when I was younger. I had a couple of years of it, but I'm not fluent in it. And I know when I engage people that speak different languages, there is this kind of tension that comes because I don't know if I can engage them in a way that provides a place of safety, right?
Hmm.
And I know if I feel that they must in some way feel that too. And so I can imagine how powerful it is, like you're saying, to not even have to worry about that. As soon as you walk through the door, it's welcome in the languages that are needed for the kids that speak their specific language, right? And it's understandable, it's safe, it's comfortable, and there isn't that tension that I'm not only gonna, not maybe potentially not be understood academically, but again, I have to go back even to the linguistic, which is first. That's the foundation. I'm not even going to be understood by my language, right? So that's
Hmm.
so powerful.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's a huge misunderstanding of certain, and there's studies out there about family engagement and the misperceptions of certain cultures, um, parents and that they
Hmm.
don't care about their child's education because look, they're not showing up and they're not responding. And then studies have been done of when you give resources in that parent's uh, native tongue, when you
Mm,
reach out in a way that they are culturally used to, how they start showing up, how they start participating, right? And so, this idea that we have families from certain culture groups that do not participate, do not care about their child's achievement is such a huge myth. And it's crazy. Like, we have so many languages
hmm.
represented at our school, and we are just, communicating on a basic level in two. And I just think to myself, like, if we had more, if we
Yeah,
can do more, like what we would start seeing come out of our community.
right, right. Yeah, that I'm sure that it would absolutely. I mean, the branches would just shake with leaves falling down because there would be so many people, again, going back to that piece of safety, that would feel included, right? Included
Hmm.
in the conversation that is even just the introductory conversation that is to be had when it comes to academics in school. Hi, how are you? Right? How peaceful that can be when it comes from your own language rather than
Yeah.
a language that's not your first, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, tell me a little bit about the background of the kids in your classroom and the families. What are the needs of the kids that you're serving? What's their background? You said that there's multiple different cultures that are there, but give us a little bit more on that.
So in the dual language program, we have what's called like we strive for a 50-50 population level. So the model is that you have 50% of your students whose first language is Spanish. And that could also mean that maybe they're learning Spanish and English at home. That's called like a simultaneous bilingual. And that's also valid considering someone who's their strong bases in Spanish. So 50% of our students' first language is Spanish, and then 50% of our students' first language is English. So that
Hmm.
uh, group that their first language is English or another language. So we have some students coming in who are trilingual,
Wow.
right? Like I've had students who speak Mandarin, English, and Spanish. So Mandarin at home, and then English and Spanish in my classroom. So that English group, right, is not just English. It's very
Sure.
diverse population within that as well. And then the 50% who are native Spanish speakers are um, from also a very diverse group of Hispanic countries: Argentinians, Mexicans, Spain, Chile, Colombia, you name it. So it's just a huge population of students. A lot of them are neighborhood kids.
Hmm.
The school was started because there was a high percentage of Latinos in the neighborhood,
Hmm.
but then has morphed, within our area, gentrification being pushed out, like a lot of
Yeah.
kids driving in to a lot more diverse Latino community, I would say.
Okay. Wow. So there is just a beautiful gathering of so many different cultures there. That's really rich. And I'm sure,
Yeah, and I will also add one that I forgot, which is funny because I'm in this group as well, is our mixed race kids too, right? Who it's
yeah,
like they have one Spanish speaking parent, they
right,
got one English speaking parent or Mandarin speaking parent. So there's kids that, don't fit the boxes that we've
right,
created that are also inside that space too.
right. How do the kids interact with all that richness that is there? Because again, that's not this school is not conventional in terms of, and I say that with air quotes because I love the unconventionalness of it. I wish that it was a conventional and more universal model because there is so many different cultures there that it must have an effect on the students and also the teachers and the staff that are working there. Tell me a little bit about that.
So, in regards to how the students interact, I'll wait till she closes the door. It's okay, you're good.
It's all good. We
Okay.
got people coming through.
We do, in and out. So in regards to how students kind of interact, it's funny because even though it's a program that might not be as common in our country, it's so funny how as adults we've constructed the boundaries, right? The
Mm,
social boundaries and how, I mean, man, if you ever get the chance one day to walk into a dual language kindergarten class and watch those kids whip out every source of communication they have, eating their lunch together, and not even like I walked into a kindergarten class and been like, "Are you speaking in your Spanish time right now or your English time?" They're like, "Spanish, we're just talking." I'm like, this kid's talking in Spanish, I'm talking in English. Like,
Right.
they don't even know. They're like, kindergartners like don't even know the name of their teacher, right? So
Right.
it's like they don't even know they're in a dual language program. They're like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about? I'm in school right now. Like,
We
they
just
don't see
connected
it. It's
right
even
now. What are you
weird.
talking about?
Yeah. I mean, like, I pointed to my sandwich, to his, I know his name. Like,
Right.
it's so normal. And I think when you lift those social restrictions, you don't, I'm thinking about, what the flip side of it would be. In a monolingual classroom, you welcome a student in. This is Susie. Susie only speaks Korean,
Yeah.
right? So, like, that
Mm,
introduction makes kids be like, oh, there's a social boundary here between me and Susie. I
right.
can't. Whereas when you just put them all in, we all speak Spanish, we all speak English. Guess what? Philip also speaks Mandarin.
Right.
It's just like the kids are like, okay,
Let's
let's
do
go.
it.
Like, I can still be friends with you. Language is not the only way I can communicate with you.
Right. Right. And I think that that's really huge. Like you're saying is that we have lost our capability of dreaming when it comes to the different ways that we can connect, right? There are so many different modes of relation out there when it comes to communication. We often think that English is the only possibility, but it's not, right? And even if I am speaking English, that doesn't necessarily mean that I can't communicate with someone that only speaks Spanish. I still can. We just have to be maybe a little bit more imaginative of how we do that. But there still can be bridges there, like you're saying, gesturing, pointing, making just different signals and signs, right? Like it goes into the emphasis and the intention that is there in the room. And I think that oftentimes as students and also as teachers, we don't pay attention enough to the intention that is supposed to be there to connect with others in our environment to create a culturally responsive space. So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
I think ultimately what blooms from the when you have a space with students where there is a lack of commonality in language to begin
Hmm.
with, what blooms and the purpose of dual language is students teaching each other language naturally happens. I
Mm,
want to connect with you. Oh, that's how you say, do you want to play ball? How do you say that again? And like, right? Because students want to connect with each other.
yes.
As humans, we want to connect. So what naturally happens, and the purpose of having 50% of the population with this language background and 50% with this language background is that they will do that. They'll teach the way of saying things that students, it's very hard to teach an accent. You know what I mean? Like, you
Hmm.
have students, when you go into university, like, you're so far along in your life that you struggle to get like the accent of a language. But when you're so young, it's very easy to teach that to each other. And so that's kind of what blossoms from the struggle. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes people fear that struggle, but I mean, if you travel anywhere and immerse yourself in a place where you don't know the language, is just such a powerful experience to
Right.
be in that place and to amaze yourself and how you can figure things out and how you can get around and the kindness of other people and how you pick up language. Kind of a hot take I have is that in the United States, like, we are one of the few countries that does not really
Yeah.
support bilingualism like we should. In so many other countries in the world, like, every student comes out bilingual.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yeah.
just it's really encouraged and supported. And I think sometimes here in the United States, we don't have that perspective as much. And I really hope that with the initiatives of dual language at state level and hopefully federal level one day, as more
Hmm.
research comes out, that will really start moving forward in that as a country.
Right. I mean, you're definitely right on that. We are so behind when it comes to our willingness to go into the Duolingual and to promote it, right? Again, it's not that it is a universal thing here. You look at a lot of the different countries out there, like you said, it's a requirement, right? Or it just becomes a part of life because you're learning from other people, you're connecting with other people that speak a different language, right? And
Right?
there
Or
is a
even in people
richness.
groups, how many people groups do we have that it's like, oh yeah, I speak three, right? I'm thinking of
Yeah,
in like India, people who speak like Hindi and they also speak this language
Tamil.
and this language. And it's
Yeah.
just, and they're considered like the hardest languages to learn in the world, right?
Hmm.
And they just have them, you know? It's just like, I remember traveling to Paris and trying to talk to someone in English and it didn't work, and then tried to talk to someone in Spanish and it worked, and they also spoke French and maybe a little bit of Russian too, like these European people walking around with three, four languages in their pockets.
Right. Yeah. And we're just literally, for the majority of us, sitting in America with one. Right.
Yeah.
What it really does is it disconnects us from not only the richness of cultures, but it disconnects us from the experiences and the perspectives of others. Right.
Yeah. And I don't want to paint this perfect world of that dual language programs are perfect and it's this utopia, right? Because
Hmm.
I think if I'm being honest and transparent, it is very hard work being
Hmm.
in a dual language program. Um, and it's just something that I want to make sure to say that uh, in this country, we don't have, not everyone's on the same page about promoting different languages and, you know, intersectionality and teaching students like cross cultural skills. Not everyone is on the same page, and we don't always have the support and the resources and the curriculum that we need. And so at this point in time, it really is a push for something you believe in. And it's not easy to create
Right.
that beautiful space. Seeing those beautiful spaces is what keeps it going, but we're still very much in the building process, giving dual languages schools the tools and the structure and the support they need. I don't believe that we are there yet, but
Yeah.
I hope one day through conversations like this that we can get there.
Well, tell me about that because I think that there is something for us to learn here, right? What are the challenges that you face in a dual language school and getting it up to a place where you could sit back and say, wow, like this is an amazing space that really can, be spread throughout America, right? Like what are the challenges there?
Well, I think it starts back at the very beginning, which would be teacher preparation programs. So when I started at the University of Washington, um, there was no, so in teaching, you can get something called endorsements. You can get like
Hmm.
an ELL endorsement, a reading endorsement, which means like you specialize in that area. You are equipped to be like a reading coach, an
Sure.
intervention reading coach, if you have a reading endorsement. So when I was going to, um, my teacher prep program at the University of Washington, there was no bilingual endorsement. Like, here
Hmm.
are the supports you need to be a dual language teacher, right? It was like, oh, you speak Spanish. You should be a dual language teacher. Which, if you think about it, like, there's so much more that could be done. And now,
Right.
finally, actually, the year after I graduated, which was a little bit like, ugh, they started a endorsement for bilingual education, and it is one of those things that University of Washington is like on the cusp.
Hmm.
Really, like a handful of programs in our nation have that option to be a bilingual, to get endorsed as a bilingual teacher. And it changes the
Hmm.
name of the game, right? Because right now we have dual language teachers. The majority of us are not endorsed.
You're right.
And so having that endorsement and what really it is, that education of, how to support our bilingual learners is the beginning. And up until that point in our state, there was not many programs that offered that, right? So that's going to be really game changing. And I
Yeah.
actually had the opportunity to go back to school and they offered me a chance to get that bilingual endorsement. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was just, amazing. So I think
Right.
it starts with that,
Hmm.
more teacher preparation programs offering bilingual endorsements so that teachers go in equipped into dual
Yeah.
language programs. And then I think the second thing we really need is curriculum that reflects a dual language um, environment. Because right now, there's really no curriculum that has been written solely for dual language programs. And what I mean by that is you usually have a curriculum written in English and then translated into Spanish. Okay, not
There could be
keeping in
some spaces
mind.
in there. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like not really keeping in mind the differences in the language of Spanish, or maybe you have a curriculum that's in English and then you have another one that's in Spanish, but it's not keeping in mind students who are learning in both languages, right? And so, like,
Got it.
what's the overlap? What's the bridging? How can I do, how can I switch between the two curriculums, right? So I would say, like, even though we're starting to get there, like I'm starting to see curriculums that are not translated anymore, right? They have their own Spanish curriculum, but I think what really is needed is a comprehensive curriculum that understands that there are students learning in both languages. And so these curriculums go hand in hand and they bridge and they make connections between the two languages. And they show you throughout your day how you can segment your day into different languages, right? That's not something we have. And so we have amazing teachers trying to do that work, trying
Wow.
to, you know, connect the languages and so much creating so much stuff amongst each other, using all of their resources. So it's like kind of when you're a dual language teacher right now, you have to be a teacher. You have to be, a social worker. You have to be a counselor. Those are all things that a lot of teachers are. You have to be an advocate. You have to
Yeah.
say all the things that we do not have. And you also have to be a curriculum writer. And a lot of times you have to fill in the gap and say, okay, it's not, I don't have it. So what do I need? Right. And so I think that the teacher preparation program, the curriculum, and finally just the district support and funds.
Right.
I don't think we have, at least in the district that I'm teaching in, I don't feel we have a complete understanding of what our program is. I think that the districts don't need to just know that they have a dual language program. They have to understand what the program is doing, why it's valuable. They have to believe themselves that
Yeah.
it's valuable in order to understand what that program needs. Because if
Well,
they don't have that understanding, it's like, no, I'm not going to give you money for this because we don't have that, so it's just kind of
sure.
like a lack of communication.
And that's something that again I think is really important. Uh, is the proximity when you have these different levels of hierarchy, right? When it comes to institutions and how they're created, whether it's a district or like the school itself, or even on like a federal level, right? Or do you see the district people? Like, are the district staff in your school, walking your school, being in classrooms, witnessing what's going on to be able to know where funding is needed?
So I would say that we do have district staff walking around our school. I would say that we are still not at the level that we believe that dual language programs work. I think there's
Hmm.
still a lot of skeptics. Is this really the best model? Does this really provide students what they need? Is this really the successful way? Or do we just need to keep doing that pull out method of
Right.
pulling out all of our students whose first language is not English and giving them supports another way, right? So I think, from my perspective, in my opinion, we're still transitioning. We're still like, show me the proof, show me the evidence that this is
Right.
working, right? And so they're walking and they're walking and they're looking in our classrooms and they're totally present. But I still think there's a lack there of true understanding. And it's because, there's not like a ton of dual language programs in the news being like, look how successful we are. There's a bunch of little programs and it's
Right.
growing for sure. So I have hope for the future, but I don't think we're quite there yet, at least in my district. I've seen more success in other districts in
Hmm.
our state that are totally behind it, totally supporting their teachers, but I don't think it's something happening in every district.
Right. Right. I mean, I want to get into more of the classroom experience, but also I want to learn from this as well. Maybe give us one or two things for you as a teacher that would show a district that they were totally behind you. What would that look like?
I think it would look like time for teachers, or giving funds and time for dual language teachers to go to workshops and for professional developments where they can grow their craft of being a bilingual teacher, because that is what other teachers get. But in order for dual language teachers to get that, we need to have an understanding from the district that what we're doing is different.
Yeah.
So we need more space, more time to grow that craft. So I think that would be kind of the first thing. And then the
Hmm.
second thing I think would be funding. We need more funding than other programs to bus, if there's a student right now, at least in my district, I know busing is kind of like a buzzword, so let me explain it. If I'm the only school in the district that is a dual language school, which is the case right now, I might have other students whose first language is Spanish that need access to my program, but whose parents cannot afford to get me all the way over to that school.
Sure.
So I need the funds to get students to my school until hopefully one day there's a dual language school in their neighborhood. Because that would be the hope, right? Is that there's a dual language school in every kid's neighborhood. But right now we need funding to get students where they need to be for the optimal learning environment.
Okay. Okay. I mean, thank you for that. That's really rich. And the district people that are out there that maybe will be listening to this, or people that have the antennas to be able
The
to shoot
powers
that,
that be.
the powers that be. Hey, let's make it happen for these teachers out here. Let's go back into the classroom. So for you and your individual recipe for the, again, quote unquote, culturally responsive classroom. And again, I say quote unquote because we need to be careful with this. This is getting a little bit clicky where we say that we're culturally responsive, right? We can't, the truth is, for me at least, I don't think that we can come up with an exact recipe of what this looks like, right? We have to be very empathetic and understand that every situation is unique, right? So what Isabel's situation in her classroom looks like is going to be different than another teacher's, right? But we can still learn from her perspective. And so what does it look like for you when you instill a sense of belonging? We touched on it a little bit earlier, but give me a little bit more of the recipe that you bring to the classroom when you're like, I need to make my students feel like they belong here, because belonging is so tied, as you said earlier again, to the success that a child has when they are in their academics. What does that recipe
Yeah.
look like?
Yeah, and I think the key, and I think it just continues to hammer in the point that you're trying to say, is that I think we need to be careful as teacher because we need to understand that every year the recipe is going to be different. That
Yeah.
we don't get to have this recipe that we just keep with us for the rest of our career, right? That every year I'm going to have a different recipe because every year I get different students that
Mm-hmm.
are going through different things, that have different language backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, family backgrounds, right? So I have to be constantly changing what my recipe is going to look like. And I think that I often find teachers getting frustrated when they won't budge on their recipe and their
Mm-hmm.
students are not responding well. And then they start to blame it on students, right? Oh gosh, these students, when in reality, we need to be the ones who are good chefs and constantly changing the recipe. But I would say that in my classroom, cultivating a sense of belonging is essential to my students being able to achieve at a high level. And there's so many like concrete basic things that you can do. One of
Mm-hmm.
them would just be class meetings, something where you create a space where students get to share how they're feeling, what they're bringing into the classroom, something joyful, something hard, a space where students get to problem solve and actually have a say in what goes on in the classroom. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
Another thing that I do every year is actually LeBron James wrote. Have you seen his children's book that he wrote called I Promise?
Oh, yeah. I'm a big
Yeah.
LeBron fan. Shout out to LeBron James.
Yeah. Yeah. If you want to come on this podcast, you're
Let's
always
do it.
welcome.
Let's do it. Come on now. Put that energy out there for me.
But he wrote this awesome book called I Promise. And it's this book he wrote that he says, I think it's like in the back of the book, that it's like a book he wish he had, when he
Hmm.
was a student. And it's about all these things that he promises to himself as a student. And we use it as a foundation to create our own class promises. Like, what do we want to promise to do? I promise to be kind to others, to include
Hmm.
others. I promise to be diligent in my work, to say when I'm having a hard time and take care of my needs, right? So that's something where you create what we call buy-in.
Yeah.
That's essential to a class recipe is your students have to buy into your community. They have to believe that one, your classroom community is valuable, and two, that they have a voice and they matter, that they're an essential part of that classroom community. And a lot of that starts in them being a part of building the classroom, that they don't come into a classroom that's already set up. Teacher has it
Yeah.
all set up, all the rules are laid out. You know what I mean? That they get to decide what's valuable. And this is, I haven't been teaching forever, but in the 4 years that I've created promises with my class, they have not been the same ever. Every
Right.
class comes up with a different value system that
Right.
matters to them, right? And that makes our year run smoothly, that we can come back around and say, hey, we promise to be kind. Are we being kind in this classroom? We're not.
Mm.
Why do we care about? Oh, you already care about this, right? Because you created this promise. I don't have to convince you to be kind. You said you wanted to be kind this year, right? So it's those sort of things that I think ultimately the basis of a classroom where students belong is them feeling like they're a part of that community and that they've built that community with you and
Yeah.
they see themselves in the community.
That's so powerful, that invitation to build, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
invitation to also take critique, but it's a critique that's healthy, right? Because there's that feedback, there's the change, and it's the critique that comes that says, hey, we're not perfect, but we're a community and we're going to keep building together, right? I think that is
Mm-hmm.
so powerful what you're saying right there, because we don't understand how often kids do not feel safe to be able to build in their own classrooms. A lot of the clients that I have right now that are in my organization, psychology clients that are kids that are in their schools, don't feel like they're included in that building process. That building process doesn't even happen in their classrooms, and so that is so encouraging to hear that that's happening in yours.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think it's the essential piece. And I think that as teachers, it's also such a learning, you get to learn about your students and what they value and what's important to them. And I
Hmm.
think it kind of leads into the other piece that's important is students feeling like you care about them. They have to feel like you care.
Yeah.
That, not just that you like them or that you're nice, but that
Yeah.
you care if they show up every day. You care if they're not feeling well. You care if they're having a hard time with something.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think that's the other, besides building community, is just that relationship building and students knowing, like, if I weren't to show up to school today, like Miss Lyons would be sad.
Right.
She would be disappointed. She wants to see me here today. She's not just
Yeah.
nice to me, but she really cares about me.
Right. What does that look like for you? I know that's maybe silly for some people listening to this, but I think it's really important because sometimes we need those examples that are really dynamic that show us and illustrate for us what that looks like. What does that look like?
So, can you hear me? You cut out a little bit.
Yeah, sorry, I can hear you. I got you.
Okay, sweet. So I think that what it looks like to care for students, there's so many simple things you can do. I think the first thing that I do every single day is when I go and I open up my classroom door is I greet every single student. I look them in their eyes, I smile at them and I say, "Good morning. How are you?" to every single student as they walk in. Um, I try to think of, questions to ask them. How was your day? How was your this and that? And just like right when they open the door, that everyone is physically seen before they
Hmm.
even come in and that they're greeted, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the very first thing that I always try to do. And then some other things that I do to show that I care about students is remember. I think that the memory of a teacher is very powerful. Remembering that they had a soccer game the other day, remembering that they love to play Pokemon, and oh, look, I happen to be wearing a Pokemon shirt today. Like, those are like the magic things that kids are like, oh, you remembered that about me, and you're
Drawing those
checking in with
connections.
me.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I think the third one that's a little bit harder and takes some more work is getting to know students' families, and students knowing that you know their families and
Hmm.
that you're connecting with them and you're touching base with them and creating a team with families, like really desiring for them to know what's going on in the classroom and
Yeah.
knowing, important information from the home so that students are getting kind of like this consistent experience
Yeah.
between home and school. That one's, I think, every year, like one of my favorite things to do, but it's also a challenge because you have so many different family groups. But I think it's, there's so many studies that show um, the correlation between student achievement and family engagement. And
Yes.
I think that can really start with the teacher reaching out and making it a priority to connect with families.
Right. Again, it's that invitation, right?
Hmm.
And if with that invitation isn't there, it's hard for people to feel invited to the table or to even reach out themselves, right?
Hmm.
Because it's your space to a certain degree at first, but you also want to make it feel like it's theirs too, right?
Hmm. Yep, I think that teachers set the tone for so much. And I think that the beginning of the year is essential to setting the tone for your
Hmm.
families and what type of space you are going to have that year, and making sure that we're careful of these mantras of, well, they should have emailed me first, or they never pick up my call. Like there's so many things that can go through our head of what other people should be doing. And
Yes.
I think that a lot of times those are social norms that sometimes we forget not everyone is aware of. Like
Yeah.
not everyone has the same background, and they, in their mind, it's a completely different social norm. And so there's like just such a wide berth of miscommunication that can come from that, instead of having this more open-minded question of why aren't they reaching out?
Hmm.
Why aren't they answering my calls? And how can I make sure that happens? It's just
Yeah.
two different ways of thinking of it, but it can be really pivotal for students and families.
Right. Right. I mean, that is so powerful. Uh, tell me a little bit about the how do you provide soil for a child to grow not only in grades but in the challenges that they face in their life? Because you said something earlier that you ask the kids what's going on in their lives, and I think a lot of the times when especially you're dealing with kids that are in the BIPOC community that have different challenges in their lives that have to do with socioeconomic things or racial things, right? We, as kind of stewards for these kids in different situations and different environments, have to do a better job of being cognizant of not only the growth that they have to do, in the classroom, but also the things that they're bringing in, right? How do you find a balance for that as a teacher?
Well, I think that it's so important to realize that those are not separate things, but that they're all interconnected.
Yes,
That
talk
whatever
about
a
it.
yeah, whatever a student is happening like outside of the classroom, they're actually bringing it in.
Hmm.
That's coming into the classroom and it's impacting their academics. So it's not something that we can separate. That whenever we're feeding the social emotional health of a child, we're also feeding their academic success too,
Yes.
because healthy students are more likely to achieve. Okay,
Right.
so those are like completely connected, right? And I think that it's so important for me to teach students lifelong healthy habits and coping skills that are
Hmm.
individual to them, and teaching them that like it's okay to have these big feelings, because sometimes unfair things are happening outside of school. Sometimes things are happening outside of school that Miss Lyons can't solve. They're
Yeah.
big things, right? And it's okay to have big feelings about that. And what do we do with those big feelings?
Mm,
Like, how do I take those big feelings and process them? I think it's really important not just to be like, okay, take some deep breaths. Whatever you're feeling right now, just go ahead
hmm.
and shove that into whatever corner of your brain you can so we can learn some math, right? I think it's more of like, what's going on? how can I process this so that I can learn math, right? I really want those processing skills. And I think it looks different for every student. For some
Sure.
students, they need to journal, art, music, right? It's more of an outlet thing. How
Hmm.
can you let it out? How can you have some peace with it? I mean, I can't give like one, like we said, that recipe thing. It's not one. It's really like I just think about providing as many like tools. I throw as many tools as I can at my students and I tell them like be thinking about which one sticks. Which
Yeah.
one sticks for you? Because these are things that I want you to take into middle school and high school because you live in a tough world sometimes. And I think that as a teacher, that is like, if I can have my students take anything with them for the rest of
Hmm.
their lives, it's going to be those coping skills. It's going to be that growth mindset and just building that sense of resilience for them.
Right. Right. And I think that that's your that intersection that you're talking about, right? That there isn't a difference between in and outside of the classroom is something that we as an American society have always promoted that segregation. Even in our work, as adults, we're taught that you're supposed to give 100% productivity to the job, regardless of what is going on outside. But that is an unrealistic expectation because if something is going wrong at home or in my environment, which I am spending a lot of time in, and then I go to a different space, it is logical that I'm going to bring that into that next space. And so if I don't have room to process, to be able to cope with the challenges of life, then I am not going to be successful or have, more importantly, the space to address the next thing in the fullness of my being because again, I don't have the time to process, right?
Mhm.
And it's so rich to hear you say, no, there is room for that. And if anything, we can use it as a platform to be able to learn more, right? It's not just learning math, but it's learning life, right? You have to learn life in school. And that's a really important thing. And I think that a lot of times when we talk about these culturally relevant conversations, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about how
Mhm.
life is learned in school. It's not just math. It's not just reading. It's not just writing, right? It's life.
Mhm. Mhm. Totally. And I think that sometimes there's this perception that these classrooms are these neat and perfect and just like bright spaces, which they are a lot of the times. And I think that sometimes we have this fear that when things get messy in classrooms, that something's going wrong. And I think we start to lose sight that we are teaching humans. And even
Yeah.
as teachers, we come in with this like this mask persona. This is how right? You know what I mean? And it's just uh yeah, that it's okay for things to get a little bit messy sometimes and
Hmm.
understanding that like that's what growth looks like for some
Yeah.
students.
Right. I mean, tell me a little bit more about the messiness because you're hitting on something here that has a lot to do with the programming that is taught and has been taught historically when it comes to the BIPOC community. I know this for my own self as a black man and the stereotypes that come along with black men being more aggressive or different things violent, right? And so when I would be in certain situations where I would show more emotion than let's say a general situation, I would be people would be fearful of me because they thought that I was my emotions should not be in that space, right? They didn't think that my emotions were vindicative of that situation. So how is it that you create room for the messiness, for really the naturalness of life?
Yeah, I think that when it makes what you were saying makes me think of like sometimes a student needs to yell at me in order for them to understand that the way they're communicating to me is not communicating their intent. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is sometimes I need a student to yell at me so I can sit them down and have a conversation that says, you look really upset. And it's
Mm,
breaking my heart because I'm trying to understand why you're so upset. So let's have this conversation. Why are you so upset? And they're yelling, yelling, yelling. And then we get to the heart. oh, you're upset because you feel hurt by blank. Next time you're upset, in order for me to understand that message quicker, here's how you can tell me. You can
Yeah,
tell me you need a break and you need to go walk outside before you can talk to me. You can write to me. You can go shoot a couple hoops and then, you know what I mean? But I
hmm,
need to be yelled at first. Like they need to, they have to come at me somehow in order for us to start organizing things and
yeah,
be like, I understand that you're communicating anger. Let's talk about how you can communicate anger to someone like a teacher and be heard, like truly heard. Like maybe,
absolutely.
in some families, it gets really loud when they're debating and they're not trying to be hurtful to each other. Like I even think in like marriages and stuff, when you see people coming from two different families and they start arguing, right? People get hurt from the manner that it's being communicated, where the other person is like, I'm just expressing
This is the
myself. That's
norm,
how we express, right?
right?
And so that's what I mean by that messiness. Like you need to yell at me so I can talk to you, like, and it's such like, it's really giving your student power. Like, okay, so you can't yell at teachers, even though that's okay at home,
Hmm.
but let me tell you how you can communicate this important need to a teacher in the future. Like that's a lifelong tool right there, is telling them that what they're saying is important. But if you never allow that initial situation to happen, if I as a teacher just shut off and say like, disrespect, I'm not even going to listen
Yes.
to you, that conversation never happens, right? I have to kind of like put down that wall and say something important is happening. I understand that it's not being communicated in the way that I want it to be, but I have to get to the heart of it. And so I have to allow this messiness to happen.
Yeah. And as you said, you have to be able to understand that that's coming from a place, right? There's something in it going on under the surface, right? Below the epidermis, right?
Mhm.
That needs to be voiced, that needs to be attended to. And oftentimes we as human beings, again, our ego is hit as a teacher or as a person that is in power when students, right, are trying to talk to us in a way that, like you said, may be disrespectful to a certain degree, right, but is necessary because we need to be able to get to what's underneath, right? And it's really not disrespect. If anything, they're trying to say, help me, right? Trying to
Mhm.
say, help me. I don't know how to communicate. So please show me, one, that I can be acknowledged, that it's a safe place for me to communicate, and that you'll sit with me to be able to process what it is that's below the surface so you can understand me better and I can understand myself and my situation better. Right?
Yeah, and I think that often it's actually uh I think that as teachers, we can actually, because I think there's a fear sometimes. If I let a student yell at me, all these students are just going to think they can yell at me. I have
Right. It's
to
just
make an
anarchy.
example, right? But I think when we like show students on the flip side how we handle disrespect and we meet it with respect, that
Mm,
they actually say, whoa, this teacher respects me and cares about me. And if I'm having a hard day and I lose control of my body, she's going to be there for me. And I think that it actually, the way that you handle other students actually cultivates respect from other students, because what it's really showing is caring,
right.
right? And I know I'm talking about it like it's like this easy thing, like snap my fingers, but I think sometimes I've had situations where I get yelled at all year long. We have to have the conversation all year long. And it's not until the next grade or the grade after that they come back to me and say, like, Miss Lyons, all those times I yelled at you, I'm sorry. And like I see now.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it really, you have to be in it for that long-term game, and you kind of have to, you really have to understand, you really, oh, there goes the AirPod.
It's all good.
There we go. You really have to understand like the empathy piece,
Yeah.
where students are coming from, and really be a detective into the heart
Right.
instead of the way that it's showing up in the moment.
Right. Right. And you have to be able to understand that a part of empathy, and this is where kind of my research comes in, is I've kind of been sketching out a rough kind of formula to empathy, but a part of the formula is that if we can't empathize with ourselves first on the basis of understanding that people have different experiences than us, which is going to enact destabilizing emotions from us, right? Which means that's the disrespect, that's the fear of the person, that's the confusion that can turn into rage, right? Or that's the irritability, right? These types of things. If we can't sit with that first, then we won't have space to be able to actually tend to the other person. That we have to really be intentional with how we clear ourselves up when those situations arise, and even after, right? Because oftentimes it's hard to do it in real time. You can get better over time, but it's hard to do it in real time. We need to spend time with ourselves, really tending to the things that we've been through in our classrooms, right? To be able to have space for the next day. But we have to be very intentional with how we move and how we are connected to ourselves to then be able to make room for other people. And
And that it's okay to loop back. Because
yeah.
I think that some people think they have to do it right the first time. And I can't tell you the amount of times that I've done it wrong.
Hmm.
And then I've had to take a student out and say, I am so sorry. Can we redo this? Let's try this again. Like Miss Lyons, when you yelled at me, Miss Lyons' emotions went up with you. And, now I've come back down and like, let's talk again. And now it's still effective. I think that's a myth of parenting, of teaching, of any social reaction that like you have to do it right the first time. And I think
Hmm.
some people don't even attempt because like I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to react to you. But I think the key thing is that reflection piece and
Yeah.
then being willing to go back and circle back and restore.
Right. Right. Yeah. The willingness to again, we often say fail, but it's the willingness to progress, right? And to change, because we're not failing. We're learning how we operate, right? We're learning our different thresholds. We're learning the thresholds of other people. And then we can, from there, strike out from a place of confidence, of information, to be able to connect and really co-create an environment of safety and of welcome.
Hmm.
Um, wow, it's already been an hour and 11 minutes. This episode is I don't want to take too much more time of yours. There is so much richness. I have so many more questions, but I'm not going to ask them all to you. We might have to get another session going here soon.
Yeah.
What I will ask is this: the deepness that you bring to yourself, the intention that you bring to your kids. Like I said, I've known you since we were kids. We lived next to each other when we were young, and always been kicking it throughout the years. But there is growth here that is so profound to be able to really help you transform not only yourself, but your kids. Where does that come from? Where is that well rooted in that gives you the availability to be able to constantly learn, to be willing to progress, to be willing to make mistakes, to go back to the drawing board, to learn from others? Where does that come from?
I think it really comes from being willing to put myself in hard spots,
Hmm.
being willing to put my feet to the fire. And yeah, I think that I wouldn't be where I am right now if I wasn't afraid. If I would not be where I am right now if I was afraid of asking myself hard questions.
Hmm.
And I think um, as I was in university, I really took a hard look at the world and saw brokenness and injustice. And I had a really long time of it breaking my heart.
Yeah.
And, as a Christian, just coming to the Lord and saying, how, why, anger, and then the Lord just meeting me
Mm.
and saying, like, out of like, we can restore things. And I
Right.
think really, like, that is God's whole, like, restoration is really like my hope to restore, not to say that the brokenness is not there or to explain it away, but to say that like God's purpose is to restore. And that's really what I think it is that like God brought me up to the brokenness and shoved my face in it. And he said, you're actually a part of this brokenness too. and you've contributed. And instead of letting me just like crawl into this dark corner or and close my eyes, like he said, like let's talk about restoration.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where I continue to be, is just like a heart to restore and a heart to ask myself really hard questions that hurt. And I think that in those moments is when you start to build empathy and just see like that we have so much hope. And having so many students who I've seen just bloom and flourish from hard situations, and you can't help but look back and say like there is a God out there because we
Hmm.
live in so much darkness. And so I think that's really where the root of it is just the journey that God has taken me through and the hope of restoration that he's shown me through it.
Right. Wow. I mean, thank you for your own personal testimony. I think that
Hmm.
there is power to be drawn, whether you believe in God or you don't. I think that,
Hmm.
you know, what our willingness to sit in broken places and to not drown ourselves in pity, right? But to see that we can actually change our situations. We can change the situations of other people that we have proximity to, is how the
Hmm.
world progresses. So often we are just we look to the wayside. We don't think that we have power, right? But it is on the individual basis that we can create change. A teacher in her classroom has contact with 25 kids. Well, those 25 kids are going to grow up and have contact with so many more people, right? And
Hmm.
it is a multiplicity that happens from that movement, from the one, right? And so I just want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for the wisdom that you imparted today. And I just hope that this podcast episode can bring the resources that you need. Like I said, to all the people that have resources out there, let's make it happen. Come on now.
Just, put my email in the link below, my phone number. You can text me anything. Please, I'm here.
Come on now. Come on now. We need to make this change
LeBron
happen.
James. LeBron James, I'm here if you want to come in my classroom. I love your book.
Hey,
Michael Jordan, too. I just read Michael Jordan's kids' book. Anybody,
okay.
I'm here. Just
Okay.
shameless plug.
I'm about it. I'm about it. As long as I get to come along with you, I'm all for it.
And also I want to thank you just for creating this space. Ever since you started this podcast, I was just like, wow, like it's just such an important space to have and just such I hope it to be and know it is a space that just banishes fear. And
Hmm.
that's what I really hope it is, that it makes people brave and it helps people just push outside their boundaries of fear. So thank you for just opening this space and having it here. And I hope I can come back again, and I can't wait to hear even more episodes. Seriously.
Well, I appreciate it. This podcast again was inspired to give platforms to people that come from all different walks of life, and it's an honor to be able to hold space with you, not only as your as a cousin, but as someone who truly is just inspired by the work that you do on a daily basis and has something to learn from you and all the other people that I'll have on this podcast. And so, thank you for piloting our first, online version of this podcast. To the people
Yes.
that are listening, we are on video cameras. We're doing it, she's in her house. I'm in my own studio. And this is what it's going to be now. We're going to go out and we're going to try to reach even more people with this online platform. So I'm excited to see how it can grow. Please, people, tell everyone about the Race Relations Podcast. You can find us on
Yes.
Instagram at Race Relations Podcast and www.racerelationspodcast.com. And we're on all the different streaming platforms out there, Spotify, Anchor, and yeah. I am so happy with this episode. I can't wait for people to hear it and stay tuned for more.